She's a transformational guru who turns your woes into wins. As a former C-suite executive, she has a knack for coaching impactful strategies with clarity and passion. She is the mom behind the dad jokes, breaking any tension with her dry sense of humor. Welcome to the stage, Amy Johnson.
This is the moment, tonight is the night. We'll fight till it's over, so we put our hands up like the ceiling can't hold us.
We are all failing. According to the Harvard Business Review, 60 to 90% of all strategies fail. You just heard a morning of conversations around how you build for success for the future, and then 60 to 90% of those fail. So why do strategies fail? Lack of clarity, lack of resources, lack of planning, resistance to change, lack of accountability, rigidness or resistance to adapting your strategy, and lack of visibility into execution. So let me tell you about some silent signals that you can use to know, are you going to be successful in your execution or not? Here's some ones in your business to look for. Are there hallway meetings after the meeting? We all know there are, right? Are there silos in your business? Are people working in their own lane only? Are the leaders in your organization focusing on different priorities? Is there an increase in absence or turnover that's to happen suddenly? Well, how do we change that statistic? 60 to 90%. And we spend a lot of time on strategy in our lives, right? Not only personally, but in business. Here's what I've seen over the years working in this field. There are two foundational areas that change the trajectory of execution success. They are how an organization minds for conflict. You heard that earlier today. That's how an organization discusses the hard things, right? And then the second one is how they harness and communicate clarity for what's next. Does it invite people in? Do they see themselves in your strategy? Today, I'm going to provide you with a framework and some tools for driving clarity and inviting discussions on the hard things. Our goal at the end of this 20 minutes is for you to become part of that 10 to 40% that succeeds. Because guess what? It truly does change lives when we're all on or surrounded by a team of people who are in sync. So let's start. All right, first we're going to start off with the model. And this is the framework that we use in our organization to consult with businesses on their strategy. We call it becoming evergreen. Evergreen, by definition, means universally and continually relevant. And there are 4 pillars to our framework. The first one, harnessing clarity. Second, creating leadership to team synergy. The third, zeroing in. And the fourth, amplifying execution. Over my career, I've worked in different organizations that have utilized different paths and or structures to strategy development. We've implemented OKRs, objectives and key results. We've used Patrick Lencioni's 6 important questions, or his framework around the working genius. We've used Gino Wickman's EOS, or Entrepreneurial Operating System. There's a gentleman named Rich Horwath who uses the GHOST framework for strategic thinking. All of these frameworks are frameworks, but what we've done is taken them in their individual parts and put them together and use them in a practical application, taking all those models on what failed, what didn't work, and put them into a model to become evergreen. So what is strategy really, right? What does it really mean? Because you hear that term so many times in so many different ways. Here's what strategy really means. Strategy is changing the way your business and people operate. Every organization gets into a rhythm, and when that rhythm is repetitive, that's when the business stagnates, right? That's when the competitors start to threaten your future. That's when the business starts to see declines in revenue or changes in staff. And leaders have to find ways to disrupt that cycle. So when we work with CEOs, I've asked them the question around, how do you feel right before you need to disrupt that cycle? How do you feel? Here's what they told me. I feel gravity. I feel stuck. I feel cornered. I feel the weight of wanting to be clear and inspiring so that it clicked with the people that I am working for and that they want to engage and invest themselves, not because I told them to. Well, if we're going to change the way our business and our people operate, the first thing we need to do is assess how we're thinking. Adam Grant introduces these two thinking cycles in his book, Think Again: the rethinking cycle and the overconfidence cycle. Here are some silent signals in your company or your leadership team or any team that you're in an overconfidence cycle on a regular basis. Here's what you will hear. That will never work here. That's not what my experience has shown. That's too complicated. Let's not overthink it, which by and large is my least favorite thing to hear in an organization. That's what we have always done, or that's the way we've always done it, or we've tried that before. I want to give you a story about a dynamic that I was in where I could see, at the time I didn't have the words for it, but I could see how people were in an overconfidence cycle. So I had the unique experience of being a school board chair in the largest district in Idaho with 40,000 students and 100,000 parents in the height of COVID. Yeah, lucky me, right? And at the height of COVID, the biggest issue we had to deal with was, as you guys can guess, do you require masks or do you not require masks? And my inbox was plugged with a number of emails, or had a number of emails in it, from people on all sides of that issue. But what was interesting to me was I got probably over 1,000 emails that cited one study from the National Institute of Health around the effectiveness of masks. Only half of the emails I got took pieces and excerpts of that study and said, this is why the National Institute of Health says masks are not effective and you shouldn't require them. The other half of the emails I had in my inbox were people who had taken that same study and said, this is why the National Institute of Health says masks are effective and you should require them. Exact same study, but people were reading it two different ways. That is an overconfidence cycle because they were looking at that information to confirm their own bias on both sides, right? You can probably sit right now and think about in your own business or your own life where you've been in that overconfidence cycle. So as leaders, when we're walking into building and executing on a winning strategy, we have to move from that overconfidence cycle to that rethinking cycle. So how do you do that? Well, first, we've got to know the difference between strategy development and strategic planning. Strategy development is getting curious about what we don't know in our business, in our industry, in our general market. So, strategy development is actually how you disrupt and create new thinking. Leaders have to create an environment where their teams can learn more about what you don't know, right? These are the inputs into strategy development. These are the things you have to do before you start to develop your strategy. There are things like research your market, look at the industry analyses. What are the social and cultural trends that are impacting the world today that may impact your business? What are your customers saying? Do you know how many businesses I work with that don't do customer feedback surveys today? It's amazing. It's astounding to me that one customer can complain and that becomes a change in the business instead of asking 100 customers and then making a change. Technology trends, right? How are those going to impact your business? Maybe they aren't. Maybe you're in an industry that doesn't have any impact from technology, but maybe you are. What are the risks that you have in your business? And what are you benchmarking to? What are your competitors doing? How are they changing? And what are the political, legal, and regulatory changes that are happening in your organization? You've got to rely on that evidence. You've got to bring in those outside objective viewpoints. Look at those competitors. And those inputs are how we start to develop a change and a rethinking cycle. You're using that information. You're prompting that rethinking. Have you ever heard the quote, "What got you here won't get you there"? If a company doesn't do this pre-work and gather and build and study these inputs, then their strategy development is at risk. Because becoming evergreen, when we use this model, and we're going to start to get into it, it's about turning your strategy into action. But acting on a bad strategy is never good, right? All right, so now we're going to dig into becoming evergreen. All right, pillar number 1. Here's the model. In harnessing clarity, there are 5 questions that when a business can answer these questions, they become really clear about why they exist, what they do, how they behave, where they're going, and this is one of the hardest ones, and then what's most important right now. Here are some silent signals. Here's a silent signal that clarity does not exist in your life or in your business. Most decisions are rolling uphill into the leadership, or you're asking everybody else what you should do. Doesn't mean you shouldn't get feedback, right? But at the decision point, you're having a hard time making a decision because you don't have clarity on why you exist, what you do, how you behave, and where you're going, and then what you need to do right now in order to deliver. So let's see this model in action, right? I've got a business that we did some strategic consulting with. This business, you can tell right now exactly why do they exist. They're real fun, cool people, and they create real fun, cool stuff. What do? They provide print, promo, apparel, and year-end tax form processing. How do they behave? They have fun, they're honest, and they get better. They've got a North Star on where they're going, and their most important thing this year is to become less chuggy. If you don't know what that word means, I want you all to Google it, because your kids definitely know what it means. And I learned through this process. That become less chuggy for them meant that they needed to change. They were working in an old model in an old system, and they needed to start to build foundational changes in the organization. That's how this model can work in a business. But the model works in your personal life too. So I'm going to tell you a little story about how I use this model in my personal life. A little while ago, I was a COO for one of Idaho's largest employers, and I was also a newly divorced mom, and I had just resigned from that board chair role. And so that was a lot of change, right? And that all happened in February, March, and April of the same year. And I now was a COO. I was going into work every day. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And I am the only adult in the house. And so every morning, or almost every morning, well, let me back up. Every evening, before we would go to bed at night, my daughter would ask me, "Mom, can you curl my hair in the morning?" And I would say maybe, after a number of times of being asked, because I didn't know what my morning was going to look like. But on a lot of days, I said no. And because I didn't have time in the morning to spend getting ready and curling her hair. And then in the morning, I would leave for work, right about the time I woke my kids up. And as I would leave out the door, my daughter would come down the stairs crying. And that happened to me almost every morning for about 7 months. And so I started to develop some strategies, right? Because I'm the strategy person, to help her cope with, I would leave, her brother would leave, and then she would leave, and she could walk to school. And so I would help her cope with her time alone. But it all came to a head in December of that year because I had a board meeting, and it was a pretty important board meeting, and I needed to get to work early that day. So, as a mom, you know what you do, right? You get her all ready. Okay, and we make it sound encouraging, right? Here's what we're going to do tomorrow. I'm going to wake you up in the morning. Mom's going to go out the door, but let's get ready tonight. We're going to make sure you have hot chocolate laid out so you can have hot chocolate in the morning. We've got your movie picked out. And at 9:30, I'm going to call you after the meeting's over, and we'll FaceTime, and we'll be good to go. I think it was 8:30, actually. So I thought, okay, we're good. We're prepped. I'm not going to have the crying in the morning. Because at this point, after 7 months of that, I was pretty stressed. And I felt like I was failing at everything. And so I get up the next morning, and I wake her up at 6:30. Mom's going to leave. And as I'm walking out the door, here we go, all of a sudden, I hear this just wail. And she comes running down the stairs, and she is bawling and hysterical. And it's probably one of the worst fits she'd had. And she's coming to me. And of course, when you see that as a mom, the first thing you want to do is give them a hug, right? So I'm like, okay, I can hug this out of her. So I'm like hugging her. It's going to be okay, Zoe. It's going to be okay. And this goes on, and I'm talking to hot chocolate and movies and everything. And about, as it keeps going on, I'm thinking, gosh, I got to get to work. I've got this board meeting. I've got to present. I am worried and stressed about it. I need to get myself prepared. My boss is the type of guy who thinks you have to be in the office at that moment. You got to be early, and if you're not, you're failing. And so I'm like, okay, Zoe, we got to go. You got to stop crying. We got to be done with this. And she's still going, and it's getting worse and worse, and she won't let me leave. And finally, I lost it. I lose my shit like nobody else's business on my 10-year-old daughter, and I say, Zoe, Mom's got to get to work. And if I don't get to work right now, I'm not going to make the board meeting. If I don't make the board meeting, I'm going to get fired. And if I get fired, we're not going to be able to afford your elite cheer that costs us $10,000 a year. And if we can't afford that, we're also not going to be able to afford the house, and we can't afford food. And guess what? We're going to be homeless, poor, no food, and no cheer. Yeah. How do you all feel? Imagine being 10 years old and hearing that from your mom. And it was at that moment that I knew something had to change. I tried. I had lots of thoughts. It took me about a month and a whole lot of other survivalist behaviors before I no longer was a COO. And then I had a couple months to think, what am I going to do with my life? And here's my model. And it's actually our family model. So here's why we exist. We want healthy, fulfilling lives. We want to help others see and achieve their potential. The biggest one for me was how I behaved. I needed to live with more joy in my life, and I was tired of being somebody I wasn't. So we've got our North Star around what our family's going to do. We've added in a piece around how we'll succeed, and our goal this year is to get our heartbeats in more sync. This is our family's version of becoming evergreen. And our decisions every day drive to delivering on these 6 core areas. This model created clarity for our family. This is how we harnessed clarity. So once you have that clear path forward and you start to communicate it, the next big hurdle is ensuring that your leadership, me in this situation, pass that clarity onto the team. We call this leadership to team synergy. Let's see. All right. Here is the framework underneath leadership to team synergy. Building trust, mining for conflict, commitment, and accountability. You guys, there's whole workshops around these 4 areas that we do for clients. But today, we're only going to focus on mining for conflict because that is what I have seen as the highest failure point in organizations. You can have the clarity, you have the trust, but if you can't mine for conflict, guess what happens? You lose the clarity and you lose the trust. And those 3 things will kill execution. Patrick Lencioni said, when leaders avoid the discomfort amongst themselves, they transfer it in far greater quantities to larger groups of people throughout the organizations that they are supposed to be serving. This is Thomas Kilmann's conflict profile model. This measures how assertive is each individual about conflict and how cooperative is each individual in resolving conflict. You want to be in the upper, I guess it'd be for you guys, the upper left-hand or my left-hand corner, or right in the middle. Those are the best ways to model good conflict profiles. But I want to tell you about a time that mining for conflict didn't work. It removed trust in an organization. So as that COO, I had some peers with me, some good guys, a CFO, and a plan president. And as we were building the organization that we were building, we had to get really clear on our top 5 risks. Our number 1 risk, because we were starting up a new line of business, was the sales area of our organization. That was our largest risk, and that's what we decided to focus on. So our plan president asked our sales leader to create us a sales strategy that outlined how we would build and grow sales. And he wanted him to present that to us in a meeting. Well, I walked into this meeting. I will tell you the room was incredibly uncomfortable. The sales leader, who was new to his position and had had limited sales training or leadership training, was unsure, but here's how he presented himself. He felt a real need to show bravado and to pitch the strategy he'd developed without asking for any help. He pitched what he thought was an amazing strategy. Now, the CFO and I both worked in the industry we were in, and we'd had experience in it for quite a while, and we were both in that collaborating mode, right? So we were asking questions that could help him think through some additional strategies or how to refine, right? How to get better. But our plan president was new to our industry, and prior to the meeting, he had shared both with the CFO and I that he wasn't confident in the sales leader's strategy, but that he didn't believe that the sales leader could hear that message from us. So guess what he said? He said, I'm going to have the sales leader present his strategy unchanged to our board. I left that room after he told him, you're going to present to the board, feeling like I was just watching a steer go to slaughter. Everyone else in that room knew the fate of the steer, or in our case, the sales leader, except for him. And our plan president was an avoidance conflict style. He removed the trust in the organization, and he also removed our ability to execute successfully. So what are some tools for mining for conflict? The first is give real-time permission. Here's what that looks like. When somebody brings up something tough, thank you for sharing. Thank you for having the courage to tell me what you're thinking. Thank you for bringing up something hard. That's the easiest way to encourage a team or an individual to share something that's hard. The second, know your team and ask questions. I often hear in organizations, silence means agreement. That is not true. Silence means disagreement. And if there is silence, the next thing you can do as a leader is start to ask questions individually in that group setting. How do you feel about this? You can read body language. You look like something doesn't sit right with you. Tell me what you think. That's how you start to get people talking, because you need that room to talk. That's how you change and remove that conflict. That's how you build that trust. Leaders have to remember that the absence of conflict is not harmony, it's apathy. And apathy will derail any strategy and any business. The third is an issue and problem-solving meeting format. And I'm not going to go into it today, but there is a QR code in your packet. You can get to our website, contact me, and I will give you this for free. We have the meeting format and how to resolve issues. Sometimes an issue is so big you need to bring it into a bigger setting. That's what this is for. Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Becoming evergreen means putting systems in place that are universally and continually relevant. It's in that space between the stimulus of a change in your market, a shift needed in your team, or even your own personal life. Almost fell over. It's in that space where you get to choose whether you become evergreen or not. Thank you.